Our guest this evening is Don Marshall, and Don is the executive director of the Jazz and Heritage Foundation. Well, I think they call it New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival and Foundation, correct?
Right.
New name. And so his job is to deal with a lot of issues having to do with the festival and how this foundation operates. And Don also started a nonprofit arts management or arts administration curriculum at UNO, and I'm trying to talk him into doing a similar thing here. So please welcome Don Marshall.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't know if you just want me to ramble on about all kinds of things, or and then just,
you can ramble on to start.
Yeah. Okay. Just a little background. I am a native New Orleanian, born here in 1950. Went to high school here, and when I came back from college, I became the first director of the Contemporary Arts Center back in the 70s, which was back then really an alternative space where artists in all discipline were regaining control of their careers. It was in opposition to traditional organizations like museums and theaters, and the artists wanted to have a voice. This was a little bit after the Vietnam protest and social change in our country, and artists were playing a big role in that. And fortunately, growing up in New Orleans, I was able to grow up at a time when our dances and parties and everything involved Irma Thomas and Benny Spellman and Ernie Cato, and we were having a great time doing that. And also in the 60s, spent a lot of time in the French Quarter with the beginning of Preservation Hall. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to see Sweet Em and Billy and Dee Dee Pierce and some of the great New Orleans jazz musicians. And I think with that kind of background, I've enjoyed all types of music. Ran the Contemporary Arts Center for about 9 years. It was a very rough warehouse space, no money. I seemed to be attracted to organizations with financial difficulties. And we got that going. It became a really open space for artists in the community of all disciplines. We gave the keys to the building to people who needed to rehearse all night. We tried to be the yes people in a community, and as many of you will find out, in the arts and music, it's difficult to get a break. And when you go to traditional organizations, there's rules and regulations, routines, and schedules. It's nice, I think, to have a place that says, sure, why not? Let's take a chance, and you can experiment. And I was there for about 9 years. Had a great time. We were involved heavily on the national scene. A lot of exchange between New Orleans musicians and artists and people from around the country. Left the Contemporary Arts Center and went over to Le Petit Theater, which was on the verge of bankruptcy. So I spent a couple of years sort of rebuilding that organization, primarily just by doing good work, selecting good plays, and getting good critical response. And along with good critical response, if you have a good product, you can usually market it properly. And we all of a sudden became the largest subscription-based organization in the city, ahead of the LPO, and which was not called that at that time, and the opera. During that time, I was very interested in seeing what new things could happen here. I was fortunate enough as a kid to travel around the country and around the world, and I'd always come back to New Orleans and say, well, why don't we have that here? And during the time I was at Le Petit, sort of mastered the ability to call up people, say, come on over, let's talk about starting something new, and was fortunate enough to have success in starting the Tennessee Williams New Orleans Literary Festival that way, the New Orleans Film and Video Festival, and also a Mardi Gras crew called the Crew de Vue. And this was primarily just bringing people together, which I think is a good lesson to learn, particularly in a town like this, that we're in a city with such limited financial resources, and often we don't have the skill, talent, and managerial skills in every area, but I've always found that there are enough people around here, and if you keep an open mind and you bring those people together, some pretty amazing things can happen. And just a little bit more of a quick run through from the running Le Petit Theater for 5 years and those other organizations. Found myself sort of at a dead end in this community. Couldn't really find a job that I wanted. I am sort of ADD, so I like to hop around in about every 5 years. I think most people in arts administration like the idea, like to execute it, and then move on to something else. And ended up across the lake and teaching at Southeastern in Hammond, running a cultural resource management program, working with a lot of arts organizations over there, and then knew that I had to get the proper degrees to continue teaching and get on a tenure track, so I was commuting to UNO and was involved with the arts administration program where I got my master's, and then was offered the job to run the program. So I did that until about 2004. At that time, the Jazz and Heritage Festival was having a great deal of financial difficulty. I grew up with the festival in the 70s, was actually a board member of the Jazz and Heritage Foundation, as it was called then. And oddly enough, I think most of you who understand nonprofit management, you need fresh blood on boards and changes and things. And all of a sudden, when I took this new job, I realized that many of the people that I had served with on the board in the 70s were still there, and that the organization did not have term limits, and that was one of the many problems that it was dealing with and is still dealing with. You can only make change in small steps. But after September 11th, the festival itself really didn't understand the complexities of producing an event and dealing with the change and shift in its audiences. September 11th immediately shut down really airline transportation. So people who had traditionally come to the festival from all around the world and all around the country all of a sudden didn't come that year. And once you lose that type of audience and they decide that they're going somewhere else for another festival or another type of vacation, it's very difficult to regain that kind of audience. And so for 3 years, the 2001 festival was very, very successful. It was, I think, the first time we had Dave Matthews, so we had, I think, over 100,000 people at the fairgrounds, which was way too many, and that actually turned off a lot of people towards the festival. The following year, after September 11th, there was a decline of maybe about 70,000 people in attendance. The next year was another 70,000 people, and the next year was approximately another 70,000, with the 2004 festival having quite a few rain dates. Luckily, we had rain insurance, but there were a combination of elements that really contributed to this serious decline in attendance and financial stability of the festival. It was my feeling that, number one, the programming itself creatively was suffering. Music that I enjoy, I believe most of the people here would enjoy, was really not being programmed into the festival. It was sort of the same old for many years. And one of the first questions I asked the festival principals was, I'd like to see a marketing plan, knowing that we had lost, 210,000 people over 3 years, and not much to my amazement, there had never been a marketing plan for the Jazz and Heritage Festival. At the same time, when I was brought in, there was quite a lot of conflict with the foundation. Now, I am the executive director of the nonprofit organization, which is now titled the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival Foundation. We own the festival. We also own the broadcast license for WWOZ radio. And I walked into quite a hotbed of problems. I mean, number one, walking in my first day and having a desk with $500,000 worth of checks to be signed and no money in the bank. And at the same time, the tension had grown considerably between the nonprofit organization, the foundation, and the producers, Festival Productions Incorporated, with the local producer of Quint Davis, who is one of the people who was responsible for starting the festival, and also George Wein, who is sort of a legend in jazz. But there was a great deal of animosity, suspicion, finger-pointing, to the point where the executive committee of the board said, hey, we're not renewing this contract, we're going to send out a request for proposals, and we're calling everybody in the country except Festival Productions. And my response was, well, we need to at least give Festival Productions another chance. We went through a fairly well-publicized media event of, the idea of a foundation dumping the producers who were pretty much responsible for the birthing of this festival, and talking to people like Clear Channel and AEG Live and some of the bigger producers around the country. And while many of them brought some very attractive proposals to the table, and many of them had some very imaginative ideas, it was my feeling that knowing how New Orleans works, it's really difficult to bring somebody in from the outside to deal with all kinds of issues, whether it's police patrol issues at the festival or getting permits for food, dealing with the infrastructure of a city that was broken down before Katrina. And I was pleased that the board went along with the decision to keep Festival Productions, but we'd also put in a clause that since we were no longer able to provide the $2 million upfront money, that the producers had to basically front the money. And that was a hard thing for Festival Productions. They brought in then the second place finishers, AEG Live, which is out of California and Denver. They're a big entertainment conglomerate. They produce the movie Ray. They own Celine Dion in Las Vegas, the Millennium Dome, the Kodak this, the Staple thing. So, they have the money. And last year, I think was one of the more interesting years that we had. I was pleased to sort of be able to get at the table and start asking for some fresh talent, whether it was the Wilcos or the Los Lonely Boys or some of the things that I felt that were more reflective of what was going on in contemporary music. And I felt very good about last year's entertainment lineup. We were also blessed with probably the best weather the festival's ever had. It's kind of ironic. We would have the best weather followed by the worst weather we've ever had. But it felt like San Diego at the Jazz Fest instead of, sweating to death out there. So we had good attendance, good profits. We were able to walk away with over $2 million in profits, which is then split between the foundation and the producers, and we were able to pay our bills and move forward. I was very enthusiastic about looking forward to this year and continuing on in evolving the music lineup and becoming more involved in the community. And of course, Katrina hit. The question then was, do we have a fairgrounds to do it? Do we have a city to do it? Do we have the money to do it? Will there be an audience to do it? Will there be airlines to fly people in? Will there be hotels? And the initial reaction by most people was, we can't do it. I threatened that I would get out on the Acura stage myself and yodel if necessary, but we were going to do a damn festival. So the festival went on over the last couple months. It's shrunk considerably. Originally it was sort of 4 months ago, it was about half the size, and we had the producers were eliminating certain tents. We had eliminated the blues tent, we'd eliminate the jazz tent, we'd eliminate the gospel tent, and then slowly we realized that it was impossible to cut back and do quite the cutbacks that were being discussed. And so slowly things became, they reappeared. Now, one of the ironic things about this year's festival is that we do depend heavily on sponsorship. And for the last couple of years, we've been at a brick wall of basically $1.2 million in sponsorship. The largest chunk of that coming from Honda, the Acura stage. We've had support from Popeyes and different Sprint. Nothing major. And all of a sudden, with this year, we are now over $4 million in sponsorship. And it's been pretty phenomenal. I think a lot of people in New Orleans are realizing that the outside world cares about New Orleans. They want to show support. And we've been put in a very unique situation of actually having to decide between different corporations who wanted visibility. So for this year, Shell Oil, which wanted to sort of celebrate their return to New Orleans, has done a lot for this city financially. It's pretty amazing because before Katrina, most organizations were lucky to get a $15,000 grant from Shell. We're talking much larger numbers for sponsorship and the other things that they've done. American Express is on with us. Tenet Healthcare, which used to support the Hornets, I believe is moving their money back to the arts, which is good. And we have various other sponsors. So the sponsorship picture in New Orleans has changed radically. The big question that we'll be dealing with is, will these sponsors stay with us? So sponsorship management is a huge issue with events like this. You have to make sure that the executives are happy, all the staff people that are coming in get the right passes, that they're treated well, and they want to come back. So that's one of the areas that we're focusing a lot of attention on. We've never had quite this type of sponsorship and the demands on the staff. Now our staff, like everything in New Orleans, has shrunk. And I think if you talk to any arts organization in the city, you're talking about smaller staff and more work. The one good thing that is for students and internships is that, before when you were doing an internship at a major organization, you were given some important tasks, but a lot of menial tasks. Right now you can walk into any organization and become their development director, and stuff. So I think there's some real opportunities here. And, looking at New Orleans, the festival I think is going to be very good this year. I'm seeing any type of event or gathering, people in New Orleans are in such a celebratory mood that they love seeing each other. They're happy to be back, and there just seems to be a much better attitude. I don't know what your feelings are in Mardi Gras, but having experienced Mardi Gras since the 50s, it kind of brought back memories of a Mardi Gras that was about New Orleans, and the costumes were more exotic in the French Quarter in greater numbers, and people were really happy to be there. So we're seeing good things happen, I think, in sort of the rebirthing of our culture, even when, you have to overcome certain challenges. A lot of the arts organizations right now are circulating a petition about the closing of the Theater for the Performing Arts. There is no place really for the opera, the symphony, the ballet, and many of the arts organizations, and it's the feeling of the arts community that this is just basic stupidity and incompetence by the city, and working very hard to get that open. The thing about New Orleans right now that I see is that this is a time for change. I'm working with lots of different groups because I've been involved with multidisciplinary activities. When I leave here tonight, I pulled together a group of all the photographers in town, and we're working towards creating a nonprofit organization, an international photography expo, Thanksgiving weekend, dealing with the archival issues of what do you do if you're a photographer. A lot of photographers lost everything, their negatives, their prints were washed away. How can we funnel money from the outside if there's no infrastructure? And I think this is a time, where anyone in this audience, if you have an idea and a passion, you can start something in this town because the brick walls and the rules and regulations are no longer here. And as long as you're willing to sort of take your idea, get other people to work with you, and pursue it, a lot of really great things can happen here.
So if they do have an idea like that, then is there a group? You just said there's a photography group. What other group can they reference to join or to kind of get themselves started?
Well, I think one of the most important groups in town in the music scene, of course, is the Tipitinas Foundation. And I mean, they have done an incredible job in, first of all, networking between the musicians. I mean, everybody was scattered. I was fortunate enough to come back here before Rita had a place to live, and worked with the Tipitinas Foundation, and we called a couple community-wide meetings. I guess this was back in November, maybe. and 80 people from the music community showed up, representatives from the universities, representatives from the classical music scene, record producers, the handful of musicians who were back in town. It was really the first time that the music community had broken down those barriers of, oh, the classical music people can't talk to the, the House of Blues people and stuff. And again, everybody was just so damn happy to be back and see each other. I mean, there's a whole different feeling of community here, which I hope we don't lose, and I think we will if we're not careful. But Tipitina's is really the organization that has taken leadership in the music community, and I think will continue to do that. They've sort of evolved Tipitina's from purely, the nightclub with the music offices elsewhere. They've combined them, and they're continuing to raise money and to come up with ideas to provide money for musicians. Also in town, you have the Musicians Clinic, which was founded basically to provide inexpensive health care to musicians who obviously don't have health insurance. Most people in the arts don't. And all of their facilities went underwater. They evacuated to Lafayette, and they're back with a vengeance, actually taking on a few things that are different from their mission. They are getting the Musicians Clinic up and running here. They've got one now in Lafayette, and they're opening up a sister clinic in Austin, Texas. But oddly enough, because of some of the principles, they've been able to raise money, and the Musicians Clinic has been giving every musician in town who asked $100 to perform. One of the problems coming back to town with clubs was that the clubs were broke. They didn't have the audiences, they didn't have the money to pay the musicians. So this was a nice thing if a band of 5 was going to play at one of the small bars or something, they could get $500 to pay the musicians. So they've been doing this, and I think they're going to evolve to do a little bit more like that, although right now I think their goal is to expand the Musicians Clinic to also include people in the service industry and in restaurants. I mean, most people working in the arts end up being waiters and waitresses, and they too don't have any kind of health insurance. And another organization that is really moving forward is the Habitat for Humanities. I'm sure everybody's read about the Musicians Village. They've broken ground on that. Habitat has an amazing ability to raise money. They've raised millions, and it looks like they even have the money now for the, the Ellis Marcellus Music Center / school. So anyone who's interested in existing organizations, those are some of the organizations you can partner with. I'm always interested in seeing where, what ideas that our foundation can do. The Jazz and Heritage Foundation, before the meltdown, was doing numerous programs. We have, and we're trying to work to reviving a couple programs. One is called Raising the Roof, where we helped prepare musicians to buy their first homes, working with the banks, and then basically paid for the closing cost. We've had a small business loan for the cultural economy program. We have had a Heritage School of Music. We've had a whole Jazz Journeys series. Recently, we just, this past Friday, sort of brought one of them back online. We did Ladies of Jazz at the CAC, and this coming Friday, we have another part 2. There were so many great female vocalists in town that we needed to break it up. But we're starting back with different programs and things. So again, you can do this individually. I mean, if you think of things that you need to happen in this town, again, it's more like the Wild West. Things can happen here, whether it's through the university or through your own efforts or getting people together. There are some organizations, obviously, that can act as umbrellas, but this is the time to move forward. My concern right now is that as we're coming back together, there really has not been the discussion of, how are we going to make this better? Before Katrina, we had some of the elements. We always wondered why we weren't Austin, why we weren't Nashville, why we weren't Memphis. And there were numerous reasons, from infrastructure to financing. And right now, as we're all very excited about people coming back to New Orleans, the clubs getting some attendance, the Jazz Fest happening, people slowly finding ways to, get back to their homes. I don't see a lot of discussion on how it's going to be better. Because right now we're in a city where as you drive through the neighborhoods, there were a lot of poor neighborhoods before Katrina, and they look a hell of a lot worse now. And I think it's going to take some strong leadership in this community to pull people together and say, look, it's time we started acting a little bit more intelligently and smarter and start planning for how this is going to become a major music industry city that utilizes the talent that's here. New Orleans music has had a great difficulty in getting to the outside world unless you're bombed out of your mind dancing wildly at Tipitina's, and you don't get that emotional feel of New Orleans music when you're listening to it over the radio. And there are ways of dealing with that, but I don't think that we've had the business infrastructure and the financing to really take that to the next level.
So how do you organize the attempts to try to make it better? I mean, you're obviously occupying a bully pulpit. Who else? And how do you organize those people and get them in the same room?
Well, let's see, I have a grant deadline for Friday. Basically, what I know from my perspective, what I'm hoping to accomplish is this summer pulling together a music summit and been drafting up sort of an invited list. A lot of people are against having these open meetings because you have an open meeting in, say, the music industry, and half your time is going to be spent about somebody complaining about somebody ripping off their CD and selling it in a parking lot, and you really don't get to the bigger issues. So what we're looking at doing is inviting top people, musicians, educators, producers, festival promoters, people who are here and smart and making a difference. The challenge that we're also facing is that music should not really just stand alone. I think you have to look at the overall picture of New Orleans, of the arts, including visual arts, theater, dance, and also the entertainment industry, including film. So the big challenge now is, do we do 3 different summits over a 3-week weekend period of time and basically hire someone to do a strategic plan for each of those areas and just put some meat into some of the ideas and programs that have been discussed. I do encourage everyone to go to the web and look at the BringNewOrleansBack.com Cultural Committee report. You may have already done that. I know in my class that was the first assignment, was to take a look at this, reflect on it, what's wrong with it, what's good with it, what's your interest, and let's move ahead. And I think it's important to take a look at this report, particularly the cultural report. With the elections going on right now, I'm not sure exactly where this is going to go. It's associated with one candidate. If that candidate gets elected, maybe it will get into process. The report itself calls for a cultural commission. And we were very fortunate. I mean, I was involved in the early stages of this report and got very frustrated. I was, standing on the table screaming that we need housing. Housing is an issue. We need to look at all the issues that are impacting the entire community. And, people were saying, oh, well, we need a music festival in April. I'm going, oh my God, haven't you ever been to the French Quarter Festival, the Jazz Festival? We don't need to put Band-Aids on this. We have to look at the bigger issues. But luckily, consultants were brought in. The plan was rewritten and focused, and it is a pretty intelligent plan, but it's an outline. And I think everybody should look at this outline, and it's something that gives us some goals to set, some ways to rethink New Orleans and to do it right. I'm just concerned that it sits there on a piece of paper and really doesn't get executed.
Do you take the profits from the festival that the foundation earns, and do you invest those in other cultural institutions? Is that the deal?
Up until the downturn of the festival, basically the foundation would take the profits. I mean, any nonprofit organization is to reinvest its profits into its mission. And we had developed about 7 or 8 large programs. I mentioned the Raising the Roof program, our seed loan program, School of Music, lecture series, jazz concerts, the whole thing. And basically, over the years we've given away $7 million to the community. We also had a community outreach grant where different arts organizations and individuals could apply to the foundation for funds. With the financial situation being what it was back in 03 and 04, all those programs were basically shut down for survival mode. And this past festival, the profits that were made from 05 have been able to to sort of put us on some financial footing where we're paying all of our bills, we have money in the bank. There is a feeling that we need to basically bring back some of our investments and our reserves, cash reserves and things for future. And so while we're at a pretty good spot, particularly considering all the other arts organizations, we're hoping for profit this year so we can return to our level of investments and simultaneously start back some of the programs. I've been working to start some of the programs by actually seeking external funds. And we had some funding from the Higher Ground Relief Fund that Wynton Marsalis funded or raised the money for. We received a small grant, and with that, we're bringing back our Ladies of Jazz. We're starting a Latin festival this summer and a couple other events, including hopefully a blues festival in the fall. So I've been able to seek funds from other foundations, but it's kind of odd for a foundation then to seek funds from other foundations. But it was something that was needed all along, and that was one of the reasons that I think I was hired.
How do you, the board is made up of 30 members, right? So everybody's going to have their pet projects, right? So how do you make sure that the money goes to legitimate concerns? Is that a problem?
I think it has been. Right now, it was interesting because there are 30 board members, there are 15 advisory council members, and right now we have 12 past presidents. And people don't like to leave the Jazz and Heritage Festival and Foundation board. I mean, there's a certain amount of prestige involved with it. You get so many perks. You can give them to your friends. It's a nice thing to be in New Orleans. So, there has been that kind of attitude towards thing, and then you layer on, sort of the traditional New Orleans patronage approach that we see in politics and pretty much everything, across the city. My feeling is that, one of the problems we have in this city is because of our economic problems that people are underpaid for their services, so they expect to get other things, other perks for it. That seems to be the way we've functioned for hundreds of years here. One of the biggest problems that a nonprofit can have is not having term limits, so that you have turnover and fresh ideas and fresh blood, and you don't have the opportunity to build up those types of sects that then have their own personal agendas and things. And while we've worked through a lot of those problems, we still have not been able to address the term limit problems. Back about 4 or 5 years ago, a consulting firm was brought in, did a long-range plan. Over $100,000 was spent on the long-range plan. The top recommendation was to put term limits in, and the plan ended up in the garbage. People were just not interested in not being involved. So I've been involved with nonprofits for a long time. I realize that you have to take small steps to get there. I thought I was on the verge of getting to that point before Katrina, and other things have gotten in the way. But I think by really supporting the best board members, the ones who have the least to gain through those types of things, making sure that they're chairs of committees and officers, that within a year we should be on the verge of changing that.
So you're trying to reform that organization and trying to save the cultural life of New Orleans at the same time. You've got a big job.
A little bit.
Well, anybody have any questions of Don Marshall? Yes, sir.
Well, first, last year was the first year we actually had money for marketing. That was probably the biggest change. And we have to thank the state of Louisiana. The Cultural Recreation and Tourism Program had given us $225,000 for marketing. They didn't give it to us directly. Basically, we had it as a credit for Peter Mayer Advertising, which does all the state's advertising. And last year was the first year that you would see different, colorful print ads in the New York Times, LA papers, Boston papers, and everything. And I think that had a great deal to do with, I mean, the talent lineup itself, plus the publicity and the advertising, I think really made it pretty exceptional last year. This year, we do have the money again from the state. They've been very generous to us. They also give money to other events, like Essence Festival has had marketing money, and a lot of other activities. In the past, up until this year, you had to spend the money on advertising outside of Louisiana. That's changed a little bit so that we could do some advertising in Baton Rouge and Lafayette and Shreveport and things. I don't think that we have changed our marketing, but the world has changed its interest in New Orleans. And right now, I mean, I've just been amazed that, you know, all of a sudden USA Today's announcing our lineup, or Rolling Stone, or whoever. So while we haven't really done that much differently this year, anything you do in New Orleans, New York Times wants a story, CNN wants a story, and everything. And I think we have been so very fortunate, you know, to have the outside media care about this city. I mean, I think they are the ones that are keeping New Orleans, you know, in people's minds. I think, you know, Mardi Gras was an interesting dilemma for a lot of people. I thought it was pretty amazing to wake up, you know, Mardi Gras morning and see on CNN that, you know, here was the Zulu warriors at the beginning of the Zulu parade, and then all of a sudden they're switching to Soledad O'Brien on Bourbon Street, who then switches you to Bay St. Louis. And so I think you have pretty good balanced reporting. But I've been very, very amazed and impressed with the support that we're getting. But it's almost something that we're not doing. It's that you can't help but get covered if you're doing something in New Orleans. There is a board structure that is really not properly designed for what needs to be done. And in addition to term limits, I propose that we change our bylaws. Right now, there should be, in a traditional situation, there should be committees to deal with certain things. For example, one of the things that's of great interest to me is the culture and heritage of this area. And while it doesn't necessarily, drive ticket sales, the uniqueness of our festival is that we are celebrating the culture of the Cajuns, the African Americans, the celebrations that we have here. And yet, we don't have a board committee that's focusing on that. The board likes to get into the talent issues and stuff. That's much more glamorous. And because of the lack of that kind of infrastructure and oversight, one of the first things to go this year was all the culture and heritage. All of a sudden, the 4 tents that we have out there with the weavers and the spinners and the boat builders and the tradesmen who do all the wonderful plaster work, that was gone. And I kind of, got pretty upset about it, and I said, well, I'll do it. I'll find the money. And luckily, we were able to find $100,000 from American Express to at least make sure that we retain the African American cultural exhibits, a photography exhibit, and also what had been cut was one of our music heritage stages, which again is not a big draw for the festival itself, but it's an opportunity for something like this where musicians are interviewed, and it ranges from the big names to the local musicians we love. And it was my feeling that this is the one year that we should be talking and listening to what happened to people and the impact it had, and for it not to be there would have been a disgrace. So, the systems aren't there, and in my own strange way, I'm see myself more as a renegade within an arts organization and stuff. So I tend to go ahead and just move forward with things and then find out, oops, I forgot to tell the board that I'm, having this or that. So, the other day was kind of interesting. We had an executive committee meeting, and I said, okay, well, look, I've got to change my act here. I've got to let them know that, there's potential to do a Latin festival in June and a blues festival in November. So it went through the executive committee, but there really wasn't, normally it should go through some kind of committee system, and it doesn't exist. And it's difficult for someone like me, who just sort of gets out of control, to not have a system at least, to do it. So hopefully within 6 months, our legal committee will be revising the bylaws and staying away from term limits, but we can at least get a committee structure to function. It's a good question. And this year's festival, there have been so many challenges. And, one of the biggest things is that, we have a commitment to New Orleans musicians. I mean, that's what we're about. In the past, we've been able to tell Kermit Ruffin, here's your parking pass, here's this amount of money, and we'll see you at the gig. Now it's, how many of you musicians do we have to fly in? How many hotel rooms? So the budget issues have become radically different for New Orleans musicians. I mean, so many of them are out of town. So, I'm dealing, the problems always end up, in somebody's lap, and usually it's, I'll get a call today and it's like, well, why isn't Henry Butler performing at the festival? And then you get into the issues of what the artist agent wanted and what we were willing to pay, and can we go back now that all the negotiations have fallen down. So it's been tough. I mean, I think one of the biggest things was tracking everybody down, and with again a smaller staff. So we've been able to sort of rectify most of that. I think you have a wide variety selection of New Orleans musicians, but there are many, many musicians here who are not performing at the festival. My goal has been to see how we can change some of that. I mean, in the early days of the festival, there was always the gazebo where it would be the first time for younger performers or street musicians or people who aren't the Neville brothers or like that could get a break. And hopefully we can do that in the future. This year there'll be some people that are missing that really should be there, and some of it was just through negotiations or miscommunication or whatever. This year, my take on the festival is that you have your New Orleans musicians, some of which have become, celebrities. I mean, it was an interesting time when you turn on the television and, Alan Toussaint would be there with Elvis Costello, or, Fats Domino was somewhere. And I think the national reputation of New Orleans musicians has benefited greatly from Katrina, one of the ironic things of Katrina. But we have the New Orleans musicians, and then you have this higher level of, big names. And my interest is sort of the in-between, the more alternative groups, the younger groups that are coming out of Athens, Georgia, and throughout the South and Texas. And you're not really going to see that much of it. I mean, you're going to see, the Bruce Springsteens, you're going to see luckily, Elvis Costello has been working with Alan Toussaint. I think that's going to be pretty major. And, your higher end sort of older musicians, but you're not getting any of your real cutting edge people who are, Nico Case is not going to be at the festival this year. There should be people like that, new musicians who are pushing the boundaries of music. So you're going to get New Orleans musicians, and then I think your higher superstars that are coming in, the Paul Simons, the Bob Dylans, those types. But I do think that, I think last year was a pretty exciting year for New Orleans musicians because of the quality of the overall talent. And this year, of course, it'll have a different impact of, God, it's great to be back. Some of these people have not seen each other I think it's going to be to me, the Jazz Fest, the really good thing about it this year, and there are many good things, I hate to be negative, but that's my nature, is that this will be the major, reunion of the New Orleans music scene. We've seen it growing slowly, but nobody has really been able to afford to fly everybody back and book them and, risk, whatever. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good question. I don't have a real solid answer. We're sort of living day by day. I do think that is a challenge for all of us. Luckily, these different, media entities have opened up offices and actually have staff people down here and everything. I think we have developed a lot of great relationships, people who, care about New Orleans, the time that they've spent down here. And, it's a good question. How do we continue that? I don't know the exact answer, but it's important that we do, and we make sure that they know that, they're invited back, or they keep, these communications. But, before this, if you sent a press release to the New York Times about the Jazz Fest, it went in the garbage. Now they're looking for stories and what are the angles. And then also with our sponsors, we have the sponsors, American Express, trying to figure out what their angles are with the New York Times and LA and stuff. So it's a major challenge. It's a good one to have. But again, maybe there needs to be a little bit more serious attempt to address that question. 2 in a row. Ideally for me, and I think that's one of the things that I was trying to push on the table, was that the musicians at the Jazz Fest, if our mission is to support and promote New Orleans and Louisiana music, culture, and heritage, that there are groups that actually have been influenced by New Orleans music or influence New Orleans music, or my personal thing is really it should be a festival about the Southeast and Texas. What's going on. I mean, when you look at, what gave birth to blues and jazz and gospel, it was really the Southeast region. And then you throw in your Cajuns and your Tex-Mex and what's going on over there. And if I was ruling the world, that's exactly what it would be. I'd have drive-by truckers, I'd have other groups like that, performing at the Jazz Festival. And if there was to be a major performer, there should be some connection. Now, you can make some connections to a Jimmy Buffett, being from, the Gulf Coast. Not anybody I'm going to run across the street to see. Dave Matthews, is Charlottesville, Virginia, and has somewhat of a little bit of a jazz thing, but, and loves New Orleans, loves the festival. I just think there's a lot more real roots music that relates to what we do. And I think ultimately, the big names will sell the tickets. People are coming from around the country sometimes because they'll see that. But I think that there's an opportunity to really, relate to a whole audience that we're not reaching.
One more question, Natalie.
We don't have enough. Basically, that is an area that we need to spend a little bit more attention to. And with an organization that's 35 years, you had people that were traditionally doing that. They would pass away or move on, and they weren't replaced. Gregory Davis, who teaches in this program, is obviously one of the key bookers of the whole thing. But he has a certain area that he's booking. I don't think we do a good enough job in that area. Don't quote me on that. But, you know, when you talk to, like, say, Bonnaroo, you know, they joke about having, you know, some younger kids, sort of, you know, trophy wives or something that know what's going on in the club scene, and they're on top of it. We don't have that. You know, we're basically going from the top of who are the big names, who's available, and it's a scramble. I mean, 6 weeks ago, we would have thought, I mean, there was a whole different lineup than what is there now, and of course, everybody thought, oh, because of Katrina, U2 was coming and the Rolling Stones were going to come. Well, you know, they'll come, but you still have to come up with $1 million to get them here and stuff. And nobody plays for free. You know, anybody in the music industry, I mean, they may be able to walk on and do it, but if you've got your agents and your band and your touring and you know, the red M&Ms you need in your dressing room or whatever, it's a little bit different situation. But we do need, I think, some new voices in the music booking.
You know, why don't you show your appreciation to Don and also show him how you want him here next year. You want this guy.